Following the Trump-Xi meeting in mid-May, officials in both the United States and China started describing bilateral ties as a constructive relationship of strategic stability. Is this term important? What does it even mean? To learn more, we spoke to an expert to see what this new term means for both countries.
I think for the Chinese government, this is a major change, this constructive strategic relationship. They have spent quite a long time thinking about it, defining it, etc. From the US perspective, I think it was just quite similar to some of the previous formulations. And of course, the US side, at least some people on the US side, had always wanted a constructive relationship with the People's Republic of China. But I think for China's side, one big change, even though it's not so explicit in the wording of the new phrase, it is implied that the constructive nature means that the relationship has to be constructive for China. So whatever the US is doing going forward in terms of major policies, it would have to be constructive for China's interests as well as for a bilateral relationship.
The U.S. China relationship has gone through different phases. How is this concept of constructive strategic stability similar to and different from previous terms used by the United States and China to describe their relationship?
There had been, and still is, this kind of running debate in the policy community about how much competition there should be between the US and China and how much engagement, etc. And that is still a little bit up in the air. And there's now, with the current administration, there looks like there's a difference of opinion between the top of the administration, the president, the vice president, and some of the secretaries versus the middle bureaucracy, which I guess is still quite focused on the competition aspect of U.S.-China relationship. I guess the closest comparison would be the new style of great power relationship, which was the previous Chinese formulation. China wanted a recognition by the United States that China was a major power in global affairs. As such, the core interests of China should be respected. But to me, there is a difference between that formulation, which was formulated when China was a rising superpower. This newer formulation, I think, is China's recognition that it is a superpower, which it is. Objectively, if you look at the economy, you look at the size of the military, etc., China is a superpower. And as such, anything that's constructive, as seen by China, and also creating stability, would have to be beneficial to China's core interests, including sovereignty issues, Taiwan. Trade, I think China has shown quite a bit of flexibility. The reality is that despite, in some periods, very high tariff rates imposed by the US on China, China has not fully retaliated. On some issues, China has shown greater willingness to retaliate with rare earth bans and so on and so forth. So I think the new formulation is a recognition that China has arrived as a superpower. And as such, it's going to begin to demand that its core interests are respected, not just by what China would see as sort of less powerful countries, but also by the other superpower, which is the United States.
What implications does this new term have for China's global ambitions?
When you consider this new phrasing with the national security law in the People's Republic of China, as well as the new ethnic unity law, implies that the constructive nature of the relationship has to be based on policies in other countries, which would be constructive for China's core interests. The ethnic unity law that was passed in the NPC session back in March, but it came into force on July 1st this year, that imposes a global regime on speech and action, not just among Chinese citizens, which, I guess Chinese government had always imposed constraints on the behavior of Chinese citizens anywhere in the world, but also increasingly among anyone, including American citizens. That is a dramatic expansion of territoriality of the legal regime of the People's Republic of China. There is a question on whether the US and other countries will accept that, whether they coordinate some kind of actions against that, and what will China do in response. That will be one of the true tests, I guess. There are many other ways that this phrasing can be tested, whether this constructive relationship of stability can be maintained going forward.